up, guys? Today, I'm going to go over hopefully the entire overview of what you can expect from the new CFP course. Initially, I had planned to do it in two streams, where this one I was just going to do the outline, and then the next one I was going to go over what the application process is going to look like. But I think I can squeeze it all into one. And instead of doing a second stream on March 1st, I figured I'd jump on Facebook Live and Instagram and do an hour each of just general mental game Q&A, and a little bit of CFP hype, since that's the day that we're going to be starting the opening of the applications for the second fleet of guys. So just real quick, what you're looking at right here on screen is a program called Slack. It's something that we tried out with the first flight of CFP guys. If you missed what was going on in my blog and on Facebook toward the beginning of the year, basically I took a group of 8 losing players as the first flight for this project. So it's been kind of experimental, and it's been really cool to start from a foundation and start to archive content from there. These guys have helped a lot to optimize the program from a position of like the ground up, which is something that, while it's frustrating at first because it feels like it's something that's so new and needs so many things nailed down, that it almost feels like it's too overwhelming at first. But I felt like I was comfortable enough going into it that I knew it was a big load, and I took only the most ambitious guys from the selection of applications. So it's been a really good group. Gotten to know these guys decently well so far, and it turns out when me and Tim announced that we were going to Europe in April, like 4 or 5 of these guys jumped up and said, "Oh yeah, we're coming, and we're gonna all meet up," which is awesome. So basically, Slack is a way to subcategorize threads similar to Skype, but more private and more organized. You can see there's sub threads on the side where it says like general, night vision, PO solver, PO unlocked. That's basically places where guys can post specific questions pertaining to different stuff. So it's something that this group likes to use. I'm not like making it mandatory for my CFP guys, but like when you get picked up in a flight, you will have a team basically. In other words, this new team will be like the March team or Flight 2. And all of you guys will be grouped in Skype, which we also have, but we use Slack on the side for more general discussion. And then from there on, that'll be like the guys who you are paired with to do work, the guys who help you create stuff like mental models, which I'll be getting into. Basically, it's your team, which I think brings a level of, how do you say this? Not obligation, but accountability to your program. So that's what I think we really have going for us, is that we've come up with ways to leverage the team aspect, but also do like fun competitive stuff. Like this month, the guys wanted to do a challenge, so we're doing a prop bet where everybody puts up $100, and of the 8 students and the 2 preliminary CFP guys that I actually took on before to begin this program with archiving stuff, they joined in too, and everybody will put in $100. I'll throw up 100 too, just for fun. And whoever has the highest win rate after 90 hours of play in the month of March will win the jackpot for this flight's prop bet for that month. So it's kind of cool. You can come up with stuff like that where it gets competitive but still healthy. Overall, I'd have to say that like the networking aspect of a poker player's career is definitely something super healthy for his mental game if he puts attention on it and in a way that tries to optimize it. So I guess I'm starting with this because I want to make it clear that like the benefits of a CFP program when run correctly are very much mental as much as they are technical in terms of the win rate upgrades. Like the fact that you're surrounded by other guys who are ambitious and motivated, and sort of all on the same page with the content that they're studying, like that's a big thing. And I know that because I have not had that coming up in my 20s, and I know how much when I started to network and get feedback coming in from different areas, it really accelerated my growth. And when you have someone who you actually enjoy working with on a daily basis, it's really good. You're welcome, Nightlife. It is pretty sweet. Okay, so what I want to go over is basically what you guys get by joining the program, um, what the terms are in terms of like the profit goals, the splits, and then an overview of the general application process that we're going to use for this one. I think this one might not go past an hour, and then I might just open it up to questions along the way. So I tried to write as much of this down as possible. I'm changing some things from the first wave. In the first flight, the guys got 33% of their profits over a 30K profit goal. This was basically because they were all losing micro stakes players for the most part. So the profit goal was smaller as to not overwhelm them, and my cut was higher because it should be for losing players. For this flight, I'm going to do a minimum profit goal of 50K, maximum profit goal of 100K. I'll probably just do one or the other. If you're a losing 50 cent NL player or below, your only option is the 50K goal. If you are break even 100 NL player or above, you'll have the option for a 100K profit goal. And the percentages that I give you will be sent to you in a way that's like decently incentivized, where it's like almost a balance point. So if you get accepted after the 3 rounds of callbacks, I will give you basically an option to do the 100K profit goal with a certain percentile, or the 50K profit goal if you qualify for it based on being a break-even player that plays 100 NL and up already. If you're a 50K bound player, profit goal wise, because of the fact that you're micro, break even, or losing, what I'll give you is a sliding scale percentage, which will be done on a case by case basis after reviewing your application, of anywhere between probably 33 and 40% share for you in terms of the overall 50K profit goal. It might even be more. That's the part that I'm not entirely sure about yet. Like, the fact that the profit goal is going up should give you guys more of a percentage. So it could possibly be over 40 in the top bracket, but that's the part that I'm not entirely sure yet, and it'll be done on a case by case. Okay, so let's talk about what you guys get. If you watch the last 2 streams, you know the general format that I'm using for this program. It's the storms. I just think it's the most direct way to train someone up from a certain context, by allowing me to go in and basically do very detailed micro work that scales them to macro concepts. And then much of the program is actually optimizing the integration process. So what you're basically looking at if you get picked for this in flight 2 is a initial storm that you do with me, along with access to a series of my packs. Basically the P1 Lock course and the PDMG pack will be guaranteed. I think I'm going to hold off on night vision for now as far as guaranteeing it, because for guys who are looking to become SSNL winners, night vision isn't even relevant yet. In other words, the type of blueprint strategies and mental game upgrades that I'm going to be focusing on don't require you to go in and map your whole environment and even waste time on that yet. So that course is going to be sort of on the side of the program. I might introduce it later, but for the most part, it's going to be a week or 2 of preliminary study where I give you access to certain packs, PDMG and PO Unlocked being guaranteed. So you get familiar with the blueprint strategies that we're going to be using, and you get familiar with data point analysis, which is the major mental game training format and thought process format that we train with. So from there, you're going to do one initial storm with me. Basically, you'll send over 5,000 hands. I will mark them, and assuming that I have something archived, because I have about 50 hours of like archived paths at this point, where I've worked with enough guys in the first program that I've created basically folders and paths of the 5 or 6 key pillars that I think hold guys back from scaling from micro to winning SSNL players and even MSNL. How we're doing that is basically similar to the same way that we beta tested night vision. I've hired the same guy, Zenfish from Run At Once, who's perfect at this type of stuff in my opinion. And he's going through all of the content basically reviewing it as a student and then organizing it in a way that he feels like creates really good paths for the learner to scale his growth in a certain zone. So for instance, if we have zones like player has a polarization leak, player has a forced aggression leak, players learning how to understand multi-street bluff catching concepts, all of these are organized into paths. And so if I do your initial storm and I see that this is your major leak, now I can drop off 3 or 4 hours worth of lessons that are specifically tailored to your type of leak. That saves me time because I don't have to meet and repeat myself, and it's still highly efficient for you because you get to see all these different angles of lessons that I've done with people who have your same leak. So I'll take this question now in the chat because it's super relevant to what I just said. The question is, how much time are you needing for your students to dedicate your course per week? I'd love to train with you, but unfortunately my time is limited, so I don't want to waste your time. Well, this works both ways. I'm interested in guys who are really prioritizing completing the course as fast as possible. Two reasons for that. One, I think people train the best when it's the only thing on their plate or the most important thing on their plate, from a level of just like healthy integration. And two, I think that if it's not the most important thing on your plate, there's a higher flake rate in terms of just becoming unmotivated or having it fall off or pushed to the wayside. And then that's just, for me, like if I have a guy who's like this, he's all in with this, or another guy who's like, for instance, got a family and sort of like half in, half out. Um, Even if the all-in guy has a lower win rate and he's technically a worse candidate, I'm still picking him because I think he scales faster. So just to be transparent, like I'm looking for the most ambitious and the most humble. Um, that's my main requirements, I guess you could say. But don't get me wrong, like there are guys in CFP1 who have families. Like you're not out if you have other shit going on. You just have to show me how you plan on making it work with your current situation. I need a second because I had that Slovenian coffee and it just hits you. Other questions in the chat while I regroup my caffeine anxiety. Some guy said thanks for bringing up Gary Vaynerchuk last stream. I'm glad you liked him. I'm all about that. Okay, yeah, so rough idea for how many hours per week. Right now, the challenge I have the guys on for March is 90 hours of play. So let's start with that. If I stick to a standard 2-to-1 of play to study, which I think is a pretty good ratio after the preliminary month. Like month 1, I think you should be at a 1-to-1 ratio, study to play, max. And for the first week, I just advise guys to completely take off and start to integrate the new blueprint content. So once this thing gets going, let's say by month 2, I would say it would be 90 play, 50 study, more or less, a month. So what is that? 140, you're looking at about 35-hour weeks, which is somewhere between part-time and full-time. I mentioned something earlier that I wanted to go into more as far as like the amount of time I'm putting into this. It's going to vary based on how well an individual student is responding to the archive content. Like, here, let me be transparent about this. When I'm archiving the content and going out of my way to make sure that beta testers are creating paths that stack properly in order to scale the student's growth in a streamlined fashion in individual zones of leaks, the reason I'm doing that is because I think it's a highly efficient way of saving me time while also providing the student with the necessary context upgrades that he needs to complete that zone. In other words, to balance the leak in the zone that he's in, stuck in. So when I look at this in terms of how much time is committed, I want you guys to understand that the reason I'm able to do this and scale it is because I'm putting a lot of attention on resourcing previous content in a way that's organized and streamlined. So one thing that's very important to me is that in the process of doing this, I don't lose personal relations with each of the members. Ideally, what I would like is to spend less time talking poker with you guys necessarily, but more time just interacting with you on like a mental game level. Like, yo, how are you doing? Let's figure out your schedule and what are some questions you have about how we can optimize this more? Or come to Amsterdam. We're going to be here in early April. Let's all chill. It's that type of stuff that doesn't really map on paper, but I know it's like the special ingredient to developing really good business relationships and having longevity in this type of thing. The last thing I want my program to become is something that scales without connection to the clients, because I think that's a failed model from the get. So in a way, I'm really not doing this from an intention to make it as lucrative from a business standpoint as possible. I want to make it as efficient as possible from both an emotional relationship point of view and also a conversion point of view to the profit goal. I said last time, like, if I could have 400 clients with a 25% success rate, it doesn't interest me. I'd rather have 100 clients with a 75% success rate, like any day of the year. Does that make sense? Probably the wrong saying there. So for the most part, I want that to be transparent, that like that's my goal here, is like high conversion rates, most efficient archived growth plan, most personal connection with the client, and probably the most accelerated plan that's out there in terms of like, I really expect my guys to be able to complete 100K profit goals in 8 months or less if you're starting at 100 NL. Like, and that's why I want the really motivated guys, because for me, like, my stuff moves fast enough lately that I don't know if I want to lock myself into a 1 year or longer CFP. Like, that would, 1 year would be like the longest that I would ever contract anyone for at this time. So cool, somebody just asked that. There really is no time period that I lock you into, but there will be certain hand goals that we set along the way monthly that I think scale toward a reasonable completion time for your profit goal. So again, like Tim came out of his room the other day, I mentioned this on the last stream, he was like, I think that you should set more strict requirements for your students who are on CFP. And on, like I said, on one hand, I get where that comes from in terms of like, okay, you don't want people falling off, but I also know how much of a burden it is for the player if he has to meet a hand requirement when he's dealing with stuff emotionally, either at or away from the tables. Like, for instance, when I look back on my growth pattern, and I'm like more of a high variance person than I think a lot of guys are, and I've experimented more, so like my growth pattern was highly volatile in the sense that it took me a while to realize that I had to honor integration phases, like more religiously almost. So there would be times when I would plow through what was supposed to be an integration phase under the pressure of feeling like I had to complete a volume goal, and it actually worked against me. So with perspective on that, now I approach my staking operations by being a lot more forgiving and flexible. If a student can honestly express that he's going through something that I identify as an integration phase. Like, and that's why I think it's so important to be in open communication with the guys who are on the program, because like as a coach, I'm more aware of where they're at than most of them are in terms of the progress. Like, because I've gone through so many iterations of stacking growth, it's very clear to me when someone's at a phase where they've hit an integration plateau, and if I push them past that point, I'm doing them a disservice as a coach, because I'm not honoring the fact that I know damn well that they need to take a week off and integrate the new content. So in a way, it would be like I could put an hourly goal or a hand goal out there, but in a way, like, I don't see this as a linear thing as much as most guys do. Like, do I think you should try to play, 30,000 hands a month? Sure. But if I see that you're really pouring it on with your effort, um, and you're plateauing in a certain month and you're like, yo, I feel like I'm on the cusp of this. I need a week off to basically flesh this out and go back in it from an inspired, confident place. I'm all about that, because I think that actually maps way faster from a playing perspective to higher win rate than the alternative of blasting through an integration phase that's begging to be honored and then having you go through a regression where now it didn't do you any good to complete the profit goal because you played 4 points below your usual win rate in the process. Thoughts on daily use of and abuse of marijuana and killing motivation? I'll go into this for a second. So one of the CFP guys that I took on, I was doing a storm with him. It was the first time that I had talked with him over the phone. I marked the hands before the lesson, which is what I do with the storm, and we went in, and about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the lesson, I basically like stopped and I was like, by the way, do you smoke weed? And I noticed he's like kind of caught off guard by the question, but he was like, yeah, I actually have like a pretty big obsession with weed, or I used to in the past or something like that. And I was like, it's funny you say that because I used to abuse weed when I played in my early 20s, and the type of patterns I was noticing in terms of the inconsistencies in his game, to me looked like Stonerville. Like that's what I remembered it as. It's like this thing, like it's almost like you have I noticed he has an awareness over the concept, but all of the inconsistencies in how it shows up shows that his focus is just off. And obviously it's an assumption to attribute that to pot, but like it's the first thing that crossed my mind. So I just said, I was like, by the way, you smoking weed? Because this looks like the way a pothead plays a 5,000 hand sample. So I would say that I've known very few people who've been able to pull it off, including myself. I think it enters you into a level of subjective distortion in the macro, even if it might enhance your awareness in the micro. So it seems to me like you're always basically combating that counteracting effect. I always felt like it made me hyper aware, which was good in the moment, but it takes a toll on you in the macro because it does have that motivation killing effect for sure. I'll show you guys some other stuff that we're working on for the integration of the program. I hope you can see this. Let me check it out. All right, good enough. So this is a mind map. We bought this program, I think it's called Simple Mind. One of the CFP guys sort of stumbled upon it. I had done a group call. Group call is something that we do with every flight once a week, so you'll have that also. And it's more mental game driven stuff and general overall group direction. Basically a way for me to ping off of the group and try to get a gauge for what might be relevant that is not included in the program yet for this set of guys. So obviously, like I have one flight that I've done this with, and a lot of the developmental stuff that Flight 2 will be getting is stuff that I think is universally applicable from Group 1, stuff that I just think makes a lot of sense from a training model perspective, and stuff that 8 different guys have said that for the most part works good for them. So this was one of the things that we did. It's this mind map. We basically bought this software as a way to stimulate the integration process after a student does a storm. So basically the way this works, you can see like the stem, and it's titled, or the root is titled Essential Truths. That's a terminology we use for trying to distill the 1, 2, or 3 main concepts that came from a certain storm lesson. In other words, the student knows what type of themes he's dealing with after he leaves that lesson or that storm, and then his goal is to go back through, create a mind map so he can follow the leads of the lesson by doing stuff like grouping certain hands, writing down certain sentences that resonate with him that I mentioned during the lesson, and then eventually he comes up with like a very powerful 1 or 2 sentence summary or reinforcer. Someone mentioned this phrase the other day called injecting logic. I think it was used, right, Tim?
Yeah.
It was from the Jared Tendler book, and it's basically like a way for you to override your in-game thought process by coming up with like simple truths, simple logical sentences that you can inject into your thought process to get it back on track. So this is the type of stuff that I think is really important for accelerating integration, because if you're not doing this, if you're not distilling the really key points of a lesson in the zones that you have leaks in, you're not allowing yourself to come back to the next session with basically a mental game upgrade, where now you have things that you know you can fall back onto, like almost safety sentences, where you know that you can, what is it?
I have some sentences written.
Oh, this is what injecting logic is.
Yeah, some of them are from the book and some of them are mine.
So yeah, this is what Tim has been doing right now, where like he's basically writing down the types of sentences that you're seeing in this mind map, where it's something that even though you're not totally integrated on the topic, you can go and latch on to this sentence that basically triggers your awareness over what you learned from that storm, and then you have a context immediately and be like, okay, I get it. This sentence is here to help me basically focus my attention through this hand in this way. So with something, just to bring some context around it, like with something like bluff catching versus fish, it matters very much the quality of your hand when someone's donking into you in terms of how strong the pair is. You can't bluff catch a weak pocket pair the same way as you can bluff catch, a medium top pair, because when a fish is donking with a high frequency merge aspect of his range, it matters a shitload. So it's something like that where you can be like, it's almost like a checking process. And with these different zones, where we've really only found like 5, 6, or 7 key pillars so far with working with different guys, in terms of the upgrades necessary that I consistently see are holding guys back from becoming winning small stakes players. You can really create pretty potent maps, and maybe I'll even release some of these maps to the fleet too, but I think it's kind of useful for a student to do it on his own, because there's something to be said about him sitting down and just like writing it out. So this is something that we bought for the Flight 1 guys. I got like a 10 pack. So far it's working pretty well. And if Flight 2 wants it, we'll get them started up on it. This is a little snap of like the archive that we're working on. Basically, it pertains to those zones that I think are holding guys back. Like these are the pillars, basically. Maybe there's closer to 10, but you see stuff like polarization, understanding equity realization, understanding how forced aggression sabotages a player. And then within those, we have the videos that we're basically offering. So far right now in the archive, I think there's about 50 hours of footage total, and we'll continue to do more. This is a clip of something that I wanted to do for the types of lessons that I drop off in your personal Dropbox after I do your initial storm. So for instance, let's pretend you get accepted into the CFP program and I do your storm and I'm like, oh, hey man, here's all the hands that I marked. I want you to watch this path of polarization videos. And then we'll meet again and see if you understand it or if you want more clarification on it. And what I've done is basically create a 3 or 4 or 5 video path that stacks. This is what our beta testers are doing, is they're basically optimizing these paths from all the lessons in the archive. And then he'll receive those videos in sequence dropped off to a personal Dropbox after I do the storm with him, and also he'll get these summaries from each lesson. So the summaries are basically like the topic, the general theme, and then we pick 3 scenarios, in other words like 2 or 3 hands from each of the lessons that are relevant to expose the concept, and we'll outline the mistake that's being made in the hand and the fix to the mistake. So before the student even goes into the lesson, he can read the brief summary and be like, okay, that's what this is going to be about, and I see how in this hand, here's the mistake and here's the fix. So it's almost like a preliminary thing that he goes into his lesson with in terms of just like a preface almost. And I thought it was cool from a place of organization, um, and a place of just like having this be more professional. Like I think you should get something dropped off in terms of like an assignment sheet or a summary of what you're about to look at. Um, so again, I'm really working on like winding this thing really tight in terms of optimizing the efficiency of the Dropbox. Um, and it's for both. Like I think there's a way to do this on both ends. That's what I was excited about. Like I think there's a way for the coach to have to show up less frequently, but for the student to still benefit equivalently from the hours of coaching that he's getting. And the only way to do that is if the coach takes enough time away from the table to contextualize the learning program with stuff like paths like this and organizing all of the archived content. So I mentioned that on the stream last time. Like that's where my attention is right now. It's like, all right, if I'm going to scale this, I have to find a way to work with these guys less in terms of like repeating myself in terms of key concepts, without losing the professionalism of the program, the relationship aspect of him feeling like he's important in the program, and knowing that I actually care about his development, and also just the overall quality of the program. Like if I'm going to work with you less, my program better be good enough that I can give you like content uploaded that's resourced and have it work. So it requires me to make sure that like my stuff is pretty well contextualized. Um, what else do I got for you? So just to sort of sum up how that works with what the student is guaranteed, you're guaranteed as much content as you need to get you to the profit goal. But what I don't have a tolerance for is if I send you off on a learning path where I say, okay, integrate these concepts, and then you send me 5,000 more hands, and I notice that it's the same leaks that haven't been integrated. Because then I'll say, okay, if these paths are working for other students, you either have a hard case student on your hand, in which case I have to approach that from a higher level of sensitivity. But first thing I'll ask is like, okay, what do you think the problem is? Why these leaks are reoccurring? Because here's the thing, and this is important for me to be transparent about. You are not going to leverage me for private time if I get good indications that you're not actually trying to integrate the content that I'm dropping off to you, the specifically tailored content for your leaks. So it works both ways. Like, and this is why I only want the most ambitious of the bunch, because I'm not holding anybody's hand through this process. I want guys who actually are ready to step up to the plate and who are independent enough to be able to do what they're told and actually do their homework. So basically, like, my entire program is based on my belief that there actually are that 15% or so of the guys who are really struggling micro and small stakes players actually have the type of makeup that it takes to be winning MSNL and high stakes players. They just haven't stumbled upon a training course yet that's able to provide them the type of growth pattern that they need. So I'm not in this to basically try to baby someone to success. I'm in this to identify the types of guys who remind me of myself on my own path, and then be like, okay, this guy's ready. He's coming along because he's the type of guy who will be independent enough that I can put him in a program like this where he gets time from me if he's struggling deeply with a concept, but he also knows he's required to integrate the specifically tailored resource lessons that I drop off to him. And don't get me wrong, like we're doing stuff constantly. Like we're active in Slack. We're doing the group call once a week where we sort of all meet up and come up with fun new direction for how we're going to keep this stuff motivating. But the storms, like you have to understand, the storms are a very micro way. The storms require a lot of effort on my part because I have to go in and mark 5,000 hands from a batch, and then I have to schedule students from all over the world in time slots to meet with them on Skype call. So I've been doing this a ton with my first flight because we're building an archive, and my calendar, like if you look at it, it's almost like a joke, like off the charts meetings. And while that's all good and I'm enjoying it for now, it can't scale because as soon as I have 25 students instead of 8, it falls to shit. So the resourcing is necessary, and I need guys who are independent enough and trusting enough of the program, um, and have good enough work ethic that they can basically take this upon themselves to know that the path works, go and apply themselves to it after I direct them toward a certain path, then come back and, like, don't get me wrong, I don't care at all about you leveraging my time if you're upgrading yourself. What I care about is if a guy thinks he deserves another lesson for free after not integrating the content that I provided him with from the last lesson. That's the type of stuff that I like have to draw the line with pretty immediately, because my time is too valuable at this point to continue to baby someone along who's not actually putting in the work. And this is only something I've understood after seeing students spin their wheels for too long when I feel like I'm providing really good lesson content. And it's one of the reasons I knew I had to move towards resourcing content and doing the learning paths. Because once you work with enough guys over the course of a couple years, you start to see that there are certain students who are good at the integration process and certain students who show up to the lesson, are hyped by it, and then don't integrate any of it. And then, like, 6 months down the road, you're still dealing with concepts that you were talking about in lesson 6 months ago. So while that's all fun and good in terms of like a business perspective of like, technically I could be like, I'm showing up for the lesson and I'm getting paid, so I don't give a fuck. I don't like that. I don't like to have a student who doesn't make profits over 6 months because he's not integrating stuff. And from a CFP standpoint, it's no longer even a healthy business model. So that's why so much of the attention with this program is put on how do we get these guys to learn how to integrate the material better and prioritize that. I have to say this because I just think it's true. I don't know who Reisner is, but it's a perfect example of someone who is unable to place their attention on something that's productive and healthy. Like, for instance, what I see is just spamming and flame, which is cool, but at the point at which you don't see value in a product, for you to hold your attention there is just unintelligent. It's just as simple as that. What else do I have? I'm wondering still if I should do away with the learning path in terms of the contents. I'm wondering if it offers anything extra. So in a way, I wanted to open this up to you guys after this in terms of giving us some feedback and support. If you have ways or ideas that could help us optimize this, we'd love to hear it. Email support@Poker Detox with a suggestion, because we have a month more to optimize this. So I guess I'll get into the application process now. It's going to be all of March, 3 callbacks. First application is going to be something along the lines of a graph of your last 12 months of play, and also like a 2-minute freestyle video where you give us whatever you think in 2 minutes sets you apart from the rest of the field and would spike our interest in you. The second callback is going to be us investigating sort of in like a gentle way. Like, you tell us about your life situation in terms of what your current debt is, what stakes you're playing, where you're living, how you expect to support yourself throughout the program. Because I'm not staking. This isn't a staking program yet. It's basically a coaching for profits, just straight up, where I will probably move guys down at the start. Like, everybody in the first flight moved down to 25, and I won't move you back up until you demonstrate, which I think is cool because you have to prove yourself. And it saves me the risk of having a student bail on the program because he goes on a 20 buy and downswing when he never had the role for it in the first place. So this is something I'll mention now. I will reload a student's account if he's losing at like 25 NL. That's also why I'm doing it as a safety. If a guy starts, like, I don't care if you start with a 500 or a 1K bankroll. You can lose that at 25 NL in your first month, and it's still worth it for me to reload you with 20 buys at that limit. So you will never start the program at a limit that you have not already demonstrated that you can beat. I'll move you up aggressively, but you've got to show me a 30K graph that you won at like 4 or 5 BBs at the previous limit. I'm not going to take strategy questions right now because it's not what I'm going to do in this stream. But come out for the mental game lecture on the 1st, and I'll talk about it there for sure. So second callback is going to be that sort of questionnaire of like, what's your sitch? How can you support yourself? Just let us get to know you a little better. And then third callback is going to be, Brian had a good name for this. A focus video. So in the past, in the last flight, what I did was I asked everybody a specific question. So everybody had to answer the same one. But this time what I'm doing is a focus question geared around both your freestyle video and what you give us for like your whole life situation and everything. So it'll be something that's more specific to you, which I think is cool because it gives us more detail on like each of the members from like a more personal place. So overall, this is what you have. 3 sets of callbacks where the first application is a graph and a 2-minute freestyle vid. That's happening from March 1st through 12th. We call it wave 1 of the applications. From March 13th to 18th, we have first callbacks where your next submission will be a video outline on your expenses in your living situation. All this is going to be video submissions. So that's from the 13th to 18th, only 5 days for that one. And then from the March 19th to the 24th, you get your last callback if you make the cut, and that's when we give you a focus video. So focus video will be like what I said, another 2-minute video, but on something specific. Like we either will ask you a specific question, or we want to know something more about like how you're going to handle X, Y, and Z in the program, and you're going to have to basically make another 2-minute video on that. 24th to 30th is our time to decide on the finalists. March 31st is the announcements. April 1st, Tim and I and the Flight 1 crew go to Amsterdam. So that'll be me taking about a week off. I'll leave the finalists with a preliminary learning path where they'll integrate the free packs that I give them, and they'll also start the archived path. And so that I think will take about a week. So they basically have like a week off while I have a week off to basically study the content that I'm putting in the box, like to get them started. And we'll have them basically begin integration that way. And then by the time I get back from Europe, we'll basically go all in. I'll start doing the storms. Then I'll begin to drop tailored paths into their specific drop boxes. So that's basically it. 3 sets of callbacks over the course of 24 days. And then announcements on the 31st for the finalist. I don't know how many I'm going to take. I doubt I'll take over 12, just because I really want to make sure that I'm not overextending myself with this. And like 8 was cool. Now I have the program a little bit more optimized, but I still want to keep it manageable. So if 12 goes well, then I'll open another one up in summer, then take like 25 or something. So I can take more guys on as more guys from earlier complete, and as I optimize the efficiency of the program better. Question, how many videos are in the PDMG pack? It's 4.5 hours of footage, 2.5 of densely edited data point analysis taken from footage that was submitted from different students that I basically scanned for assumption and bias and then voiced over, giving the new data points that I thought were more accurate. Then the last 2 hours is a mental game crowdcast that I did, where we basically took Q&A from all of the guys who bought the pack, and it turned out really nice. Would you be able to elaborate a bit on what some of the best tools you've seen to integrate information would be? I study a lot, but feel like I'm using a birdshot scatter approach when I feel like I need to use more of a finer scope approach. Cool, because it's probably what's going on if it feels that way. Um, I had a long talk with a student about integration last night, and I liked what I said so much. I'm glad I recorded it because it's in the archive now. You did you watch the Logan video yet? I'm trying to remember exactly. Okay, here's what I said. And I think I mentioned it already a little bit in this one, but it goes like this. At any given time in your development, you are at a stage of understanding things intuitively and also understanding things logically. Ultimately, I call it like the grandmaster mode, is to basically transfer everything that you understand logically to a subconsciously integrated intuition, meaning that you no longer need to think consciously about why a play is right when you make it. That would be the ultimate. Um, the reason being that once you're subconsciously integrated, not only is your awareness opened up so that you can detect higher data points, so that your exploitative capacity gets better because you're just more observant, but it also prevents you from going into over analytical distortion. In other words, you see this a lot when guys start trying to range someone mid-hand, when really a lot of what subconscious integration is like how to pull back to a macro perspective where you're not getting lost in your own ranging distortion or assumptiveness, because very few guys are capable when they start to look at the different portions of a player's range to keep a balanced perspective over how the distribution of the range looks. So this is why you get certain leaks developing um, like I had a student last night who just like flat jammed ace king pre-flop because he put the guy in ace jack and didn't want to not maximize versus that specific hand in the guy's range. This is a simple example. Um, Another student who didn't like that he was giving up on rivers because he would look at a specific hand in his villain's range that he imagined checking back that would have folded to his bet, and he would rationalize for forcing aggression in those spots, when in fact it's just not a spot where he should be forcing aggression because the overall distribution of that player's range is not weak enough for me to think that he's folding frequently enough to exploit it. So stuff like this where guys think they're doing themselves a favor by heading into over analytical territory mid-game, but what you would be better off with is a simple integrated metric for how you're going to approach certain spots. Pattern recognition is really good for this. So that's what mind map does basically. The mind mapping software that I showed before, it's a way for you to distill the concepts from a lesson. In other words, whatever you're studying at any given time, if you could take the 3 most valuable sentences from that study and distill them, nail them up on the wall, and also generate context around them, like group them with the hands that revealed that pattern to you, then what you have from that point on is what we call an essential truth in Flight 1. We sort of came up with this term to indicate that sentence of greatest distillation that now you have, that you can basically pull to the forefront of your awareness when you need something to latch onto in game, because like I said, you're not fully integrated. So when that zone pops up, you can be like, oh, this is the polarization zone. What's my essential truth from the polarization learning path? And then it pops to the front of your awareness because you've trained yourself enough to be able to basically keep it on a leash for when you need it. And now it directs your focus to a more integrated territory by keeping your decision tree simpler. So really what this is about is overall organization of your decision tree. It's necessary for you to have a really well organized decision tree if you're going to be consistent with accurate decision making. So the overall goal is to make sure that the decision tree is constructed from a really accurate place to begin with in the study. This is why mind mapping is important in terms of like making sure that you're working with someone who knows their shit. Because if you're integrating the wrong essential truths, well, that's not helping either. Ultimately, what I think I'll do from Flight 1 and these learning paths is take the best mental games that are the best mind maps that are made around specific learning paths and specific videos, and then include that to the future students in terms of study sheets for it. If I can get that, I'll be really excited, because while it is more passive for the new learner, I really think it's actually better that he has something that's hard and fast truths that he can integrate immediately. Um, For some guys, it might still work better. Like I got one guy in CFP, he's got his girlfriend recording his essential truths and he listens to them on audio because he's just more of an audio learner, which is cool. A lot of flack in the chat today. I can't even read through it all because I can't even get to a real question. I mean, I guess it means that we're getting put on the map a little bit if we've got haters. Um, so ultimately, goals for this in terms of scaling would be for guys to be completing profit goals within a year. That would make me really happy. $50,000 profit goal guys who are micro players, I think will probably still take a year because obviously they have a taller mountain to climb. Um, but overall, like what I'm going for here is really high conversion efficiency. Like I would love to have like a 75% conversion rate because to me that's more valuable, like I said, than having a more lucrative business is having something that scales from really high levels of credibility that like the program works. Because once it's proven that the program works at a higher rate than anyone's seen before in terms of like scaling a small stakes player to a winning high stakes NL player or scaling a micro player to a winning MSNL player, it's pretty much set from that point, which is what I'm sort of really gunning for in terms of scaling. Because like if I can say I have this conversion rate and we've helped this many guys and all those guys are actually, you know, legitimately independent now. Maybe some of those guys even become coaches. Maybe I can scale even further if I start to take on new coaches from guys who have completed the program before. Ultimately, when I leave poker, I'll probably make the entire thing free. Like I haven't thought much about this, but like I sent a message to Brian the other night and I was like, oh, by the way, if I were to die in some sort of like random situation, just make all the content free and put it out. But that's what I think I'll do when I leave poker altogether is I'll just take all of the detox stuff, all of the content that's archived from the coaching for profits, and I'll just put it out in the open. Um, or I'll hand the company off to who I think is like the next up and coming like big coach. But I've pretty much clarified that like I don't see myself leaving. Like I said before, like I think I'm done with poker by the time I'm 30. But now that I've been inspired to do CFP and I really want to optimize the format, I think it's more of like a 2 to 3 year plan that I'm going to be involved in it. Um, So ultimately, like, I don't care if we're like the biggest and best stable. It's not what interests me because it's the wrong plan. Like I mentioned in the last one, like I'm not competing with any other coaching for profits industry. I'm literally trying to have the best conversion rates while taking on as many students as possible at my current level in development of scaling as I can without losing um, the right energy that I want to hold about the course, which is like still being interactive with all of the students, like still relating on a personal level with everyone who's involved in the program. I think I said everything I wanted to say. That March 1st mental game is going to start on Facebook. We're going to do an hour there, and then we're going to move over to Instagram, and I'm going to end up doing another giveaway on Instagram that day. Probably a PO Unlocked pack, maybe a PDMG pack, maybe something that I think of between now and then. But definitely join us. If you're gonna make one, make the Instagram one because that's when I'm gonna be doing the giveaway. Okay, I think that's it. Everything else that I think of between now and then, I'm gonna post on my blog, so check that out. And then when we launch this for applications on March 1st, I'll make a final post on Facebook to say what's required for the first wave of the applications, and then I'll be talking about it on Facebook that day. So as long as you're on one of the outlets, you'll know what's going on. And again, you have like 12 days to get that first application in. So no rush, but Instagram, all that stuff I'll post up on I think the Instagram is actually posted in the stream. So everything a post up on Facebook that's relevant on March 1st, and we'll go from there. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you like the format. Super pumped for the second fleet, and I hope to see some of you guys come out and try to apply. Thanks, everyone.